share your desktop, I believe. So Manca will get us started.
Okay, let me just share.
There you go. Okay.
Okay. Let me just hide the. Okay, thank you. Aloha, everyone. I'm happy to be here today to present part of my dissertation research on the homestay component of intercultural exchange, investigating the experiences of exchange students. These are high school exchange students and their host families. Okay. International student mobility still primarily flows from low-income to high-income Western countries, with the US remaining as the top host destination. In 2016, there were over 80,000 international students enrolled in American high schools, of which over 20,000 students were on short-term exchange programs, living with either host family or at a boarding school. This figure includes students who are recipients of the merit-based scholarship sponsored by the US Department of State and who are participants of this study. These educational exchanges fall within the US public diplomacy's effort to bridge gaps among nations. The current literature primarily focuses on cross-cultural adjustment of international students, suggesting that adolescent youth undergo profound personal growth and development as a result of living abroad. The research also measures short and long-term impacts of international student mobility, demonstrating that the experience of living abroad may substantially affect international students' cultural identity, worldview changes, and future international mobility. However, only few studies to date look at the homestay component of study abroad, which is the focus of the study. So now let's look at the FLEX and YES exchange program and participants of the study. So the Future Leaders Exchange, or FLEX, was established in 1992 to promote people-to-people diplomacy with former Soviet countries and has later extended to include certain countries in Southeast Europe. Right now, FLEX includes 22 countries. On the other hand, we have the Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange and Study, or YES program, that started in 2002 in the aftermath of the 9/11 events to maintain good diplomatic ties with predominantly Muslim countries, and it currently includes 37 different countries. These merit-based scholarships are funded by the US Department of State. Students need to demonstrate high level of English skills, personal traits, and social skills to be among the nearly 2,000 scholarship recipients each year who get placed with an American host family and enrolled in American high school for an academic year, which means 10 months in the US. Now, who are the host families? So first and foremost, families need to meet the basic requirements set by the US Department of State. They shall receive no monetary payment for hosting, meaning they're all volunteers. They have to pass criminal background check. The main role of a host family is to provide students with a safe home, a bed of its own, 3 meals a day, a desk available to study, and transportation to and from school activities. Finally, host families can come in different shapes. They could be nuclear families, single parents, single retired adults, young family with children, or no children. These are my research questions that guided my study. So first, how do FLEX and YES exchange students experience intercultural exchange? Second, how do volunteer host families experience this exchange? And third, what are some of the impacts of the exchange on both exchange students and host families? In this study, which is a qualitative study, I utilized semi-structured interviews and observations. Due to the limited number of FLEX and YES students placed in the state of Hawaii, purposeful sampling was used to select students and their matched host families. The data presented here was collected over 2 academic years and resulted in 25 interviews that were conducted towards the end of exchange. Of this, I interviewed 13 exchange students and 12 host families. 1 host family decided not to participate in the study. Now looking at the countries that the students come from. So they come from 13 different countries. 4 of them came from Europe: Lithuania, Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, and Georgia. 1 student was from Palestine, 3 students came from Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. 2 students came from Asia, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. And 2 students from Africa, Tanzania and Mozambique. And they all ended up in Hawaii. Okay. Now, in terms of the program, 8 students were part of the YES program and 5 students were part of the FLEX. It's worth mentioning that these programs are administered in the same way, which is why I grouped them together. In terms of gender, there were 5 male students and 8 female. And in terms of the island placement here in Hawaii, 6 students were placed on Oahu, 5 on the Big Island, 1 on Molokai, and 1 on Kauai, which is the smallest island. Oh, sorry, Molokai is the smallest island of those. The average age of exchange students was 16.8. In terms of host family type, we had 4 nuclear families, 4 were single host, 3 were multi-generational families with children and grandchildren living in the immediate vicinity, and 1 family was a couple with no children of their own. Occupation-wise, we had 5 families who were retired, and other families were still full-time professionals working in various fields such as business education, tourism, and social work. In terms of years of hosting, 5 families had been involved in hosting for over 20 years, 2 of them even 30 years, while 5 families hosted for the first time. The other 2 families hosted for 2 and 5 years, respectively. So let me jump to the findings. As for exchange students, findings demonstrate that short-term exchange programs such as FLEX and YES can contribute to participants' personal growth, such as increased independence and maturity and acquisition of new skills, in particular leadership and community service skills. Not only did students learn about American, Hawaiian, Asian, and American culture, but also about Hawaiian, Asian, and sometimes even Polynesian cultures that coexist on these islands. They also built pride in their home culture by sharing it with their host families and wider host community. Over half of the students hope to study abroad again at university level, either in the US or in Western Europe. As for the host families' experiences, all families stress the benefits of learning about their students' culture. Multi-generational and nuclear host families in particular stressed the importance hosting had on their children, grandchildren, and extended family members, even neighbors. By increased cultural awareness, hosts also got to know their own culture better. Those families with YES students all mentioned that they learned more about Islam. And finally, hosting experience, even if not extremely positive, had boosted most families' desires to continue hosting as they recognize the value of intercultural exchange. Here I wanted to share 2 quotes by the students. So the first one is from a YES student from Kosovo. He said, "My host mom is my best friend during this exchange year. Everything I have done, I discussed with her and I have gone through her first. She taught me a lot about the school and how to behave. She also taught me a lot about American culture." The student was placed with a single host. Another student from Albania stated, "I learned that I'm not here just to be a guest, but I also need to do the housework and help around. Since I changed 3 different households, I'm able to adapt easier." This sentiment was commonly shared among students who changed their host families during the year. And here I have a quote by a host mother of Indonesian student who said, "Once you make that family bond, Indonesia doesn't seem so far away now. It seems more of a real place. It doesn't seem foreign. It just demystifies a lot of the world for kids and makes them realize that we're all in here together. We're all dealing with the same things." This family had 3 small children of their own. Another host mother who hosted a Tanzanian student commented on let's say, discussing religion and in particular Islam. "I think having conversations about religion now is very informative, especially with Islam. I think Americans do not know many things about it, except it must be bad." The second part of my findings relates to the mutual impacts that the exchange had on both students and host families. So both groups indicated that they became more aware and tolerant of different cultures, religions, and political systems. Open-mindedness is indeed an important skill that exchange students acquire while living abroad. By joining host family activities, this sometimes meant that students stepped out of their comfort zone, Both students and host families indicated that intercultural exchange had reduced their prejudice about other cultures and religions. For all students, community service involvement set the stage for increased awareness of not only local issues in Hawaii, but also global issues. All participants enjoy discussing politics with hosts, becoming more attuned to the regional issues that pertain to the students' home countries. And how does that relate to the homestay component? So upon open communication, culture, and live sharing often advanced into rich discussions that resulted in meaningful student-host interaction. Unlike several studies among university-level students that indicated lack of such engagement and interaction with the host family, where students felt like guests rather than family members, the Flex and Yes exchange students were encouraged by the program and partially due to their adolescent age to join host family activities and to help with family chores. I just want to conclude with two more quotes here. One is by the Flex student from Kyrgyzstan, who said, "We live in mountains, valleys, which is a very isolated place. We have such understanding that every day will be the same. I want them to understand that we're starting to have problems with the environment, air pollution, cars, all these things." So you can see that the student got connected the idea of global issues to his home country. Host father, a Palestinian student, said, "I have become very much aware of the problems and what is happening in Palestine and the Gaza Strip. It made me very aware of regional conflicts that impact the lives of the students." So in conclusion, I just wanted to point out some limitations of my study. So participants were deliberately selected in the state of Hawaii due to their proximity to the researcher. When participants are self-selected and participate voluntarily, they may be keen on emphasizing the positive experiences. Finally, the study found that both groups reap mutual benefits of the intercultural exchange as they learn from each other by living together and sharing culture daily. It was clear that a positive student-host relationship was more likely to contribute to a positive cross-cultural adjustment. Since the study took place in Hawaii, its cultural uniqueness contributed to increased multicultural awareness that extended beyond American culture and values to include Hawaiian, various Asian cultures, and sometimes Polynesian cultures. And finally, just want to point out the importance of US public diplomacy to expose these exchange students to cultural diversity in the US and American families to foreign cultures. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Manca. And very impressive coming in like right at 12 minutes. So kudos. We all struggle with that. And I'm glad you ended on the note about public diplomacy, and perhaps we could even say these programs are a form of soft diplomacy. And so perhaps we'll get a chance to talk a bit more about these things and kind of like the larger implications and how to interpret these programs in the broader sense later in the session. So thank you. And with that, we're going to transition to Scott Miller. So Scott, you should be able to share your screen.
Here we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Miller. I am a licensed school counselor and currently a PhD student at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about third culture kids and international schools, some of the issues that third culture kids struggle with, and the path forward that we can take to support them. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about what an international school is. If you're not familiar, here are some of the aspects that are common among K through 12 international schools. So these schools educate students from diverse nationalities, and these students are children of internationally mobile parents. They provide an international education or curriculum, so typically an IB curriculum. They promote international peace and understanding. They're typically run by an internationally diverse staff, and they're often privately run. Here's a couple of examples. Down here, the Munich International School, the International School of Bangkok, and Banksia Park International High School, which is in Australia. Moving on to talk about what a third culture kid is. This is the most commonly accepted definition in academic literature. So I'm just going to read it real quick. A person who has spent a significant part of his or her developmental years outside the parent's culture. the TCK builds relationships to all cultures while not having full ownership in any. Although elements from each culture are assimilated into the TCK's life experience, the sense of belonging is in relationship to others of similar background. And here's a model that was created by Pollock and Van Recken. So to give you a little context, third culture kids can commonly be understood as children of diplomats, children of international business people, children of military families, and missionary families. So in terms of TCKs, what are their strengths and their unique concerns? So as a TCK, by nature, you are traveling internationally, and oftentimes TCKs attend multiple international schools in different countries. So multiculturalism is often a byproduct of their international lifestyle. Additionally, leadership is something that has been found in research to be common among TCKs, is a high aptitude for leadership, and then a strong sense of adaptability. So TCKs often have an easy time adapting to whatever context or environment they are in. But as we will talk about later, one of the issues is creating deep and meaningful connections to the places and people that they live. So what are some of the issues? First, we have identity development in the K through 12 years. As a child and an adolescent, you are in critical developmental years. And so implementing an international transition is very difficult for these students and often has an adverse effect on their identity development. One of the common questions that is very difficult for TCKs to answer is, where are you from? It's very hard to identify a home because you may be born in one country. Say, for example, you're born in the United States and that is your passport country, but your family has moved around a lot and you've lived in multiple countries. It can be sometimes difficult to associate with a specific country and develop that identity. Furthermore, social emotional well-being. There are often adverse effects in the social emotional arena for TCKs. So anxiety, depression, isolation, the inability to create meaningful and deep connections are really common among TCKs. And then transitions themselves. Transitions are very difficult in themselves for TCKs. The physical dislocation, the feeling of grief and loss can be associated with TCKs when they leave their home. And then also students are subjected to whatever resources an international school offers them. So during a transition, it is really dependent on the international school and how much they are willing to invest in a transition program or transition support. So with a brief overview of TCKs, international schools, I want to talk about a little bit of where we can go from here. How can we support TCKs and make sure that they're getting the resources that they need? Because unfortunately, the research has shown that with international schools, which are privately run and largely independent, it's very inconsistent across international schools. Transition programs have a high variance. Some seem to be good, some seem to lack key components, and others don't even realize that there is a need for a transition program. So on this slide, I wanted to highlight three important actors in international schools that should be charged with supporting TCKs and specifically developing TCK transition programs. So counselors, teachers, and administrators are the triangles surrounding TCKs. And this collaboration is really important because administrators have the ability to green light programs. Oftentimes, counselors have an ability to give expertise and knowledge on how to tailor these programs to TCK needs. And then teachers have the ability to implement these programs and create those deep connections with students. So moving on to counselors and teachers. If we are working under the assumption of creating a program with the actors from the last slide, working with counselors and teachers is very important, and having a collaboration between counselors and teachers can be a key to success in TCK transition programs. And I created this Venn diagram because I wanted to give everyone a picture of what strengths do each actor have that can really elevate a TCK transition program. And so counselors, school counselors can bring a lot of expertise. They can bring one-on-one information and one-on-one counseling to individuals. But it is teachers who have a day-to-day connection and on a daily basis work with students. And so having expertise from counselors and teachers combined into a program where both are involved and working with each other and learning from each other, a program can really be supportive from a theory and counseling practices perspective, but also have more face time with students compared to what counselors typically get. So let's move on to a conceptual curriculum. I, along with a partner at my previous university, worked on a conceptual curriculum for a TCK transition program. This has been shortened from a previous presentation due to the time limitation. So if you have any questions about it, please feel free to ask me, but let's move into this. So this conceptual curriculum is based on a tiered system of support, which is often advocated by school counselors through ASCA, the American School Counseling Association. So the first aspect of a transition program should include a world, community, and environmental learning aspect. So orienting a student to not only their local connection, but also educating them about who they are in the world. Oftentimes, as I said before, these students have lived in many countries. So giving them the opportunity to learn about the places that they've lived, the places that they might live, international connections, and then also helping them develop some sense of identity. And so the proposed outcomes in this section of a program would be TCK education. So educating TCKs on the issues, the strengths that TCKs typically have and where they can go. Multiculturalism, so a development of that. Identity development, and then transition assistance. So this would be initial transition assistance coming into a school. The second aspect is school involvement and cohort development. From research, we know that cohorts as well as peer-to-peer interaction is really important for students transitioning into a new school. And this is especially true for students transitioning to a new school in an international context. So in this aspect or part of the transition program, you would want to support students in connecting with the school, developing a cohort of other TCKs or students at the international school to create a community for these students that are coming in, and developing friendships and relationships. And then also developing relationships with teachers and clubs and other aspects of the school beyond just feeling comfortable in the campus or on campus. Finally, working with students on an individual level. So supporting students in their individual exploration. I am a big proponent of narrative theory and narrative therapy. So working with students to develop a positive narrative about their life and who they are. This also is can be very supportive for identity development through writing assignments or other projects that can help students explore their identity development as a TCK in a safe environment. That is very important. And then moving on to some of the theoretical frameworks that I used when developing this conceptual curriculum. First, multi-tiered system of support, which was explained a little bit earlier. Person-environment fit theory is a common theory used when discussing TCKs. This theory argues that it is important to have an environment that is supportive and conducive to the person, because a person will inevitably affect and influence the environment, just as the environment will inevitably influence and affect the person. So creating an environment that is supportive for TCKs in a safe environment. Furthermore, relational cultural therapy is another important theory, and this is built on the premise of developing relationships with the cultures that you are experiencing. And so as a third culture kid, you live in a very unique third culture bubble. And so giving TCKs the opportunity to make a connection with other third culture kids, as well as your first culture, your passport culture, and local cultures is very important. And then finally, narrative theory and therapy. And this really encourages the individual to emphasize their strengths in the stories that we create about ourselves, and be realistic about what limitations we are placing on ourselves when we create those stories. And that is a very brief overview of third culture kids, international schools, and transition programs. I'd like to give a special thanks to Gianna Wiggins, who who also helped develop this conceptual curriculum. And if you have any further questions, I would be happy to answer them if you'd like to send me an email. Thank you. What time am I at, Brent?
That was good. That was about 12, 13 minutes. So
cool.
Right on, guys. And actually, this connects really well with the next presentation by Yumi Saito, who will be talking about global citizenship education here in Hawaii. Because one thing that I wonder about, having heard your presentation, Scott, is how third culture kids might experience or respond to the idea of global citizenship education, like since they are in a sense global citizens. So
yeah, often very positively.
So let's see here, Yumi, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Sorry, can you see the slide? Thank you. So, hello everyone, my name is Yumi Saito, and I'm very excited to present the global citizenship education and its implementation in Hawaii. So the presentation follows from introduction, literature review, research questions, methodology, findings and discussions, and concluding remarks. So first of all, my interest in global citizenship education stems from my experience when I was a student at K-12 school in Japan. I was born and raised in Tokyo. It is isolated. Japan is an isolated country, but I had an opportunity to meet with educators, politicians, peace builders from Europe, the US, and Africa, since they visited my school to see the education system and philosophy in Japan. So they visited our classrooms and gave us short lectures, and many of them addressed the importance of cultivating a global citizenship mindset. And this encouraged me to study abroad and work in other countries. And after several years, I realized that there are many people who understand global mindset or global citizenship in many ways. And it made me think about what is the definition or concept of global citizenship and how schools in different countries implement global citizenship education. And through studying a lot about global citizenship, and then I learned that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals mention global citizenship in Target 4.7 by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So the global citizenship and global citizenship education are defined by international organizations, NGOs, and scholars. And the UNESCO's definition mainly highlighted the sense of belonging, interconnectedness in the global society. Heater researched global citizenship as an extension of citizenship, and Nussbaum proposed narrative imagination to intentionally take the perspective of others. And Ikeda also focused on cultivating humanity and defined global citizenship as the wisdom to perceive the interconnectedness of all life and living, the courage not to fear or deny difference, but to respect and strive to understand people of different cultures and to grow from encounters with them. And third, the compassion to maintain an imaginative empathy that reaches beyond one's immediate surroundings and extends to those suffering in distant places. And it has been a challenge for me to find the literature related to global citizenship education, specifically in Hawaii, since it is relatively a new program, and many K-12 local schools started to adopt after-school global education program in recent years. There are concerns about how schools understand the conceptual framework, pedagogies, and intended outcomes of GCE because of the ambiguity and lack of clear definition of GCE. Many scholars, international organizations, and NGOs define it differently, and teachers in the field understand GCE in different ways. Through literature review, I figured out that there are mainly three approaches to understand GCE. So the first one is the global competitiveness approach. This approach is to understand global citizen as a person who can live and work effectively anywhere in the world and can compete in the global marketplace. This is deeply rooted in neoliberal perspective, and it's mainly talking or focusing on like productivity and efficiency. And second one is cosmopolitan approach. This is the idea that all humanity belongs to a single global community, and because we all live as a part of a shared global community, it is important that we understand more about each other, learn about and respect different cultural perspectives, and seek solidarity and the application of universal values. And third one is an advocacy approach. From this approach, we understand that the current world is unequal and unfair, so that it is important that people work to challenge and overcome these inequities. My research questions are, how do K-12 teachers in Hawaii understand the traits and qualities that GCE models embed in their curriculums and pedagogies? And how are these traits and qualities developed in their learners? What challenges do K-12 teachers in Hawaii face when implementing GCE into their curriculums? So this is a qualitative methodology and worked on one-on-one interviews with 4 teachers. I used the open-ended questions to generate dialogue and to elicit detailed, unrestrained responses from the participants. All participants belong to the Global Youth Organization, which is an independent international education nonprofit with a mission to promote a greater awareness and understanding of foreign affairs issues, with special attention to Hawaii's role in the Asia-Pacific region. This NPO offers a global studies curriculum to high school students in the state of Hawaii. So I approached the teachers who are registered to this organization. Through interviews and analyzing data, I figured out that the cosmopolitan values are endorsed as GC qualities that enhance social well-being. All participants expressed ideas that all people belong to a global community and take care of oneself and others for the betterment of society. One teacher answered that she thinks it's important for students to realize that they are a part of the community and they are influenced by other people, but also can influence and help people across the world. And other participants answer that global citizenship at its heart is about being a good human being and impacting the world in positive and beneficial means. And it teaches us how to be better human beings on multiple levels, individual, group, socially, economically, etc., and why it's so important in our civic, social, economic, moral responsibilities to the various communities we are part of. And the second theme is that GC needs to be further developed, especially on critical thinking skills in the case of using social media and new technologies. Because of the increase of using social media, students can search anything on the internet and get answers quickly. So the students tend to not think about the validity of the information and where the information comes from. So some teachers mentioned that teachers should teach students how to use the internet and social media critically. And as a conclusion, all participants understand GC from the cosmopolitan approach. In terms of challenges they face when implementing GCE into their curriculums, half of them mentioned that how to teach students to use new technologies such as social media. And also some people mentioned that GCE is still a new program. More teachers should be trained to teach this program. Schools need to make sure that teachers understand what GCE encompasses and feel comfortable teaching about GCE explicitly. And teachers need qualified materials to build ideas and habits of non-discrimination and positive support to the disadvantaged in classroom settings. And all of them emphasize the importance of GCE and expect more and more schools would start to adopt GCE to enhance betterment of society. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Yumi. And perhaps today, and if not today, later, we can talk more about what does global citizenship education mean in a place like Hawaii, where there have historically, and Hawaii in this sense is not unique because this is the story of Pacific more generally, where there are ongoing tensions between the global and the local, between Western and indigenous worldviews, between the experiences and interests of native populations and other immigrant populations. Like, what does it mean to use, like what potential does global citizenship education have to address some of those tensions if the goal of global citizenship education is to help us achieve a more just and equitable world? Perhaps some of those concepts can be really intractable because different populations might understand what that means differently, you know, to the native Hawaiians whose monarchy was overthrown and many consider Hawaii to be a occupied state. Like, what does global citizenship education mean in a context like that, right? So anyways, lots of interesting dynamics come into play in places like Hawaii and elsewhere. Anyways, with that in mind, we're going to transition to our last presenter, Mark McCormick, who's going to be talking about context of China and the dynamics around how students, if I remember correctly, Chinese students attempt to enroll in international universities and colleges. So anyways, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Brent. Can you hear me okay? Am I good? Great. Let's go ahead and start sharing this. Thank you all so much for joining today. I'm going to be talking about ethical issues in the Chinese study abroad industry. And you can see we have the characters right there for study abroad in Chinese. That's Liu Xue, if anyone here speaks Chinese. I lived there, well, I'll get to it in a bit, but I lived there for almost 10 years. So this is something that is quite close to my heart. So the first wave of globalization in education, according to Tierney and Lanford, was from around 1990 to 2011. There was a dramatic increase in students that were studying abroad and international student mobility. It went from about 1.3 million students to about 4.3 in this 20-year period. The number from 2017, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, was somewhere in the middle, 5 million, 5.5 million. The definition of students studying abroad or international student sometimes has issues based on how long people are studying abroad or for what purpose they are or where are they coming from at what time. So this gets a little dodgy, but it's about 5 million right now. China is the #1 sender or exporter of international students. You can see here, starting in 2007 to 2008, all the way up through 2017 to 2018, the number increased dramatically, by about 5 times, four or 5 times increase. And this is just to the United States. At least in this one, the number of Chinese students that were studying abroad last year was over 540,000. So this number has continued to become much bigger. It's obviously very big in the United States. It's big in Australia. It's big in the UK. So I think anyone that's working in higher education has probably noticed this, this trend over the past 10 to 15 years. So China has a vastly different education system for people who perhaps maybe have never been there or experienced the Chinese education system. But the adaptation and the struggles of Chinese students, as well as different aspects of the students, who is studying abroad or where they're studying abroad or what they are studying. These are all things that have been extensively studied, or at least that have been studied over the past 10 years. This is one of those trends that everything has happened so quickly. It's like we're running really fast just to try and catch up with what's going on. So all these have been examined over the past decade, but one aspect of this that has been relatively understudied is how students from mainland China are preparing to go abroad and how they are going abroad. Usually when you're an international student, you have to do visa applications, you have to do university applications, you have to prepare and take university entrance exams. And this has not really been studied. And so enter study abroad agencies. I'm cognizant of how much I wrote on this slide. I'm sorry, I'll try not just to read to everyone because we're all adults. But you can see in the first paragraph, we'll have a study abroad agency is a third-party entity who is paid to assist a student to find, apply to, and or prepare for college. And in China, agents are usually hired to assist students in finding an international institution fitting their academic goals. So the agency kind of acts as a bridge in this sense. Usually they understand the home country or the country they're currently in, culture and education system, and then they understand the issues or the problems that the other, I guess, accepting country may offer to a lot of students. And they offer services, and some students use the services just to kind of gather information, and others use it as like a one-stop just to get everything done for them to go abroad. And you may be asking yourself, why do I care about this? Because I am not originally from China, I'm from Boston. But I spent 7 years in Tianjin, China, outside of Beijing, as the director of student development, and then the director of international education at a study abroad consulting and research center. Here's a picture of me from 2013 when I was younger and in better shape and had more zest for life. It's kind of a joke. But I worked closely over those 7 years with about 100 Chinese students, probably more. That's just kind of a ballpark. But helping prepare them to go to the United States, working their way through the application process, ACT and TOEFL testing procedures, and trying to develop skills for them that would help them succeed once they arrive in the United States. One issue, though, that has happened with this is that there have been a lot of testing agencies or consulting companies that play in gray areas, if not deeply unethical ones. And this is not something that is only happening in China. If people paid attention or saw in the news a year or two ago, Operation Varsity Blues, I think it was about a year and a half ago in the United States, where parents were paying universities to get their children in. So this is a problem that we have here in the United States as well. The corruption of the university admissions process. I'm also currently right now working with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Sultan Scholarship Foundation in Saudi Arabia. And this is a problem they've had over there as well. So this isn't a problem that is special to China, but I lived and worked there for 7 years. And it's what I'm studying right now. So, but the industry is heavily unregulated. In 2017, the Chinese central government decided to make it pretty much unregulated. And over the past 3, 4, or 5 years, there's been different news stories from investigative journalists popping up about different ways that maybe some students from China are gaining entrance to American universities. You can see in the second bullet point right there, we have application fraud, falsifying high school transcripts and teacher recommendations, and straight up writing essays for students. Down there at the bottom, we have 90% of recommendation letters for Chinese applicants to Western universities are falsified, according to Bartlett et al. In 2011. And then 2 companies looked through about 250 high school students and their applications, and they found that 70% of admissions essays were written by someone other than the applicant, which every time I say that out loud, I have trouble conceptualizing that. That just is crazy to me. Half of the secondary school transcripts are doctored, and many awards and achievements have also been faked. American college admissions officers are well aware of this. I was at a conference in 2014 in New Jersey on behalf of my company in Tianjin, China, and I was told that by one admissions officer that they just assumed every single application from China had been tampered with, which really bothered me because I thought we were doing pretty good ethical work and we were really trying to bridge the gap between the United States and China for a lot of the students. But Jiang notes here, American college recruiters in China feel overwhelmed by the proliferation of cheating, lying, and fraud. And Joyce Smith from the National Association for College Admissions Counselors said there's a real concern about whether the application is authentic and whether the person who shows up at the door is the same person who applied. So American college admissions officers are well aware. I'm in the middle right now of doing semi-structured interviews, talking with students that I worked with, their friends, other students that have gone abroad, about what services they used, the ethical issues that have been involved with them, and how they feel about that. And what's kind of happening here is we're seeing, as I go through these interviews, I've done 17 right now, and I have a ways to go. So good luck to me. But what's happening right now is that there are different actors or stakeholders that are revolving around the student-teacher interaction. And you have the families that have money that are very interested in getting admission to a university. You have agencies that are happy to take that money and assist with that. And you have universities that are happy to get the students money from their parents if they're willing to pay for them to go there. And so what you're seeing is kind of this triangle of interaction around the student-teacher or the counselor-student relationship, of people that are not maybe interested in what is best for the student's educational journey. Sometimes, other times it is, but it's obviously a difficult thing that's kind of slowly coming up in my research. So, but I mean, I guess it's frustrating for me because when you have students that are getting ready to go abroad and maybe work toward global citizenship, or they're very excited about trying to be involved in the American college experience, study abroad agencies that are acting in unethical manners are doing no favors to the students. They're giving out like kind of a bad rep to admissions officers, and I think they're just doing a lot of harm in a time where hopefully intercultural communication and sharing different cultural experiences in education should be a profoundly positive experience. So I really care about that, and it's something that's really important to me. And I don't, geez, if I had a magic wand and I could fix it, I don't really know what I would do. That's something, I guess, for another person to figure out that's hopefully smarter than me. But it seems to me that maybe China could do a little more on the regulating front, and maybe the United States could think a little bit more about how they are filtering through students with the application process. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have. Thank you all so much for your time, and hope I was okay with my time myself. Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Mark. You can stop sharing your screen.
Gladly.
All right, thank you all so much. So I see numerous connections across the different presentations, but I have the opportunity to speak with all 4 of you regularly since we are all here at the University of Hawaii. So I'm going to withhold my comments and see if there are other folks who are with us here today who might like to make any comments or questions to any of the panelists. I'm so happy that we have a very nice audience with us here today. So feel free to unmute yourself, or if there are multiple people, you can maybe put the green check mark next to your name in the participants list or something like that.
Hi, Brent. Miriam here. Just wanting to make a comment to Yumi. My colleague and I, who's in the room, actually, Karina, doing research in this space, similar to what you're doing, Yumi, in Hawaii, and looking particularly at teachers' interpretation, like how they interpret and how they then implement teaching their students. And I was really impressed that our findings have been almost exactly the same as yours. So we were dealing with Australian teachers, both in the Catholic and public kind of ed system, and yeah, very, very similar results. They're looking at, you know, how do we do PD, how do we do this, what are the belief systems that sit behind, what resources do we use? So yeah, literally just ticked it off as you were reading yours. So yeah, well done. I'm glad to see that there's similar results being found across the world.
Hi, if I may come in, very interested in Mark's presentation. Thank you so much, Mary Helston from Stockholm University. As you've conjured up a lot of ideas in my head, and just from the top of my head, have you considered comparatively what I'm assuming that a lot of what you talked about might be related to a market interest in international education, right? So the idea, and this is really from the top of my head, and I haven't really looked at this, so apologies if I'm way out. But have you looked comparatively at countries where education is free, countries that don't charge? And here I'm thinking of Europe, for example, which has got the Erasmus program that allows for free study abroad within Europe, and other such schemes. I'm kind of thinking might be interesting to see whether there would be differences, whether that would be give a different approach or a different experience, I guess.
Yeah, that's a wonderful comment. Thank you. I personally haven't, but that's something that I'm in my third year here doing my PhD. So this is something I've been working on for a while, and you're the first person who has mentioned this. So I really appreciate your comment, and it's something that will get me thinking as well, I'm sure. So I can't offer anything of interest or note right now, but I really appreciate your comment. Thank you.
And the idea, Miri, is that, how does that connect back to, like, are you thinking about how free education might affect the demand from Chinese students?
Because what I was thinking, thank you for following up, and really, I mean, this is really just from the top of my head here, but I was thinking of countries such as Finland, Sweden, Norway, where university education is free. And where in the policies are, the national policies on internationalization of higher education, for example, differ somewhat, where some countries might charge outside of Europe, but within Europe, study abroad is subsidized by the European Union. So I'm just wondering if that might yield some comparative data to first of all look at, to compare, to see whether it might give a variety of experiences to report on. But the underlying idea that I have here relates to hearing similar conversations, at least among the administrative staff looking after international exchange and mobility. At least in the Nordic countries. So, and as I said, just a free idea to maybe maybe consider or look at.
Thanks so much. And just to follow up on what Miriam had said previously, perhaps Yumi and Miriam and your colleague could be in touch going forward, because I wonder about some of the additional tensions that I had mentioned after Yumi's presentation related to kind of what does it mean in practice to address some of those tensions between the global and the local, Western and indigenous, and to see if you are, if those things are emerging in your own research, and if so, to kind of be very interesting to see what similarities and differences there are there across the contexts in which yourself and Yumi are working.
Absolutely. We've already exchanged email addresses, but also I think it's really important to remember when we're talking about global competence or global citizenship, you can't do a single study in one area. We've actually got to start connecting across to have a really big picture. So I think that's something that I really want to do moving forward, is actually build and build and build and have a group of us working together across that represents the globe. Yeah. So thank you, Brent.
Thank you. One question I had was just making a connection between Manca's presentation and Scott's is, I wonder how, Manca, if you could say a bit about how the programs that you were looking at, how do they approach the transition, right? Because they're bringing students from other countries out, from different regions. And so Scott's presentation made me wonder about how do those kinds of international programs address the transition process for kind of facilitating the insertion of these international students into the context in Hawaii.
You mean the transition to the US?
Yeah.
Yeah. So these programs that I'm looking at, Flex and Yes, these are really highly structured programs. So all of the students first go under, they have a pre-departure orientation back home in their home countries, where, for example, 20 students from Tanzania or whatever country are grouped together, maybe spend a weekend someplace in the capital, and they have alumni of these programs come and talk, about their experiences, what to expect, and it's really tailored to the region or a specific country, or even, for example, for Muslim students, they would talk about, what to expect in terms of Islamophobia and how to react. And also, I remember an example of one African student who mentioned that she was really afraid of racism and said that, they told me what to do if I encounter any racist remarks in the US and who to talk to. So they do have very good support system even before they set foot in the US. And then once they're here, they have another orientation. So some students go to DC, Washington, DC, where they have orientation, big group, like conducted by a big placement organization like American Councils, and some students go directly to their states, like in Hawaii, where they have another orientation where the local coordinator will talk about Hawaii specific culture and what to look out for, things like that. So yes, the students are really well prepared, but due to their age, some of them are only 15 when they come, a lot of this just passes by, right? So many of them said, oh, I don't remember anything what they told me at orientation. I didn't listen. I just wanted to meet my peers and talk. So we don't know how much really settles in, but certainly the first few months are pretty rough and they experience the regular culture shock, but there is institutional support. Yeah.
Thanks, Manca. I could ask more questions, but just want to see. Mark, I mean, I'm fascinated by your topic. It seems I mean, just such like a rich issue to be exploring. Particularly, you know, you mentioned the controversy here in the United States in the last year and a half, where families were not only paying, you know, admissions officers, but they're also kind of trying to bribe athletics coaches for letters of, you know, admission to, so that, you know, because if you're not the best student, but you play a sport and you get a letter of, you know, from the right coach, these elite universities will let you in. So there's like this whole niche industry around, you know, parents who want their kids to go to top universities invest a tremendous amount of time and energy in kind of preparing their students to play these niche sports, you know, like jousting or whatever. So, so you know, I appreciate that mention that, you know, this isn't something we should only think about in terms of like the other, right? This is something that like low income countries are doing. That these are issues that are happening around the world in one form or another. But I was wondering if you have looked at like the temporal dimension. Like, have you seen how this is? Have you seen or read or heard anything from your participants about how this has changed over time? And I mean, and you were there for, you said 7 or 10 years, right? So how has this kind of industry, right? Because it seems like a whole kind of cottage industry or kind of sub industry that has emerged like around the college application process in China. So have you seen how this industry has grown and changed over time?
Yeah, boy, I just have so much to say. I think everyone, there's no way anyone else could know this. I think, Brent, I think you were one of the people that read my paper that was like 30 pages or 25 pages on this. So I don't want to start rambling for 15 minutes. But yeah, no, I think when I first got there in 2009, it was very, my company, but I think the field or the market as well was just starting off. If you saw the graph that I showed started in 2007 is when that boom really started for undergrad. In 2009 was when I got there. I do think that obviously very good legitimate study abroad agencies have popped up in China. I know a few people that work at them. I felt that ours was quite good. But I do think, I mean, the Chinese government suggested that around 2010 or 2011, there were anywhere from 300 to 400 agencies. And then they said in 2018, there were 4,000. So that's a 10 times increase in just 5 years with very little oversight and regulation. So, you know, a study abroad agency is not a monolithic entity. There's numerous different ways that services are being offered and how people are paying for them. But it does go back to what you mentioned, and also I think what Miri mentioned about how there's interaction here with regards to how much you're willing to pay for a service. And this is not something that's only happening in China, it's happening all over the world. But in a time in China where the middle class and the upper class are getting much richer and the poor are not, there's a concern, I guess, probably about fairness there as well, and access to a lot of these universities and institutions. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack when you start thinking about this. And what happens is I start thinking about it and I get pulled in like 12 different ways, and then I'm writing about stuff that doesn't have to do with what I was supposed to be writing about, and then everyone's looking at me like, you should stay focused. And I'm like, oh, sorry. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and Brent, thank you. And yeah, I have a lot to say. I'll stop talking and let someone else talk. Sorry.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind is just the tensions, right? Because in a way, with these hundreds of thousands of students who are studying abroad and who may have gained access to those opportunities unethically, what kinds of behaviors are they learning about what it means to be a global citizen, right? And so to kind of put these things, like to contrast these things with perhaps what the programs that Manca and Yumi have been studying, and the kinds of behaviors that international students at the schools that are Scott's focus, you know, on one hand, we're talking about global citizens as trying to teach them to be concerned with social justice and equity, but on the other hand, there's an entirely different like ethos driving the desire to participate in, you know, to gain access to international universities in the United States. And so they're like very different kinds of people who are being produced by these situations.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely been a push, you know, in however many few decades toward credentialism and just trying to get that degree, regardless of what it means. And I'm probably really naive, but I come from a family of educators, so like I actually think it's really important to like grow as a student and a young adult and that type of stuff. And you're doing the students no favors when you're teaching them or you know, gaining unethical you know, acceptances to universities, and then just kicking the can down the road to the professors who have the issue then, or yeah. Anyway, I agree with you, Brent, and I yeah, there is a tension there.
Yeah.
So.
And I had mentioned in my comments to you previously about just thinking about like what's driving this, because I think understanding the phenomenon, or kind of like describing the phenomenon and the ethical issues, is really important. But also, I wonder going forward analytically how we can understand what's driving this, because of course, if it weren't for China's growing middle or upper class, they wouldn't have the funds necessary to send their children abroad, right? So like somehow this is like connected to like circuits of like global capitalism, right? That because of like the whole export industry in China, and that is providing the capital necessary for these families to send their students abroad or to pay for these services. So I just going forward, I'm hoping that you can kind of like analyze the phenomenon very up close, but also kind of pull back to kind of think about how does this like circuit of mobility of students fit into like these larger structures and circuits of capital that kind of, if it weren't for those larger conditions, these wouldn't be possible in the first place.
And I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for Mark, when I did my research in Nepal, there was a huge element of corruption that I could have addressed and was asked to address by teachers, but I didn't feel comfortable in that space as a non-Nepali person, as someone who wanted to be able to return to Nepal, so I didn't want to dirty my bed. How have you negotiated that professional space as somebody who's been, you know, that was your job, you're now over here educating. How have you negotiated, you know, professionally and personally, the fact that you're drawing attention to essentially someone's misdeeds?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. I think when I came here to the University of Hawaii, I was actually really excited to try and to kind of move on from doing study abroad in China. I was like, yay, I'm starting a new part of my life. And then here I am studying it and writing about it and researching it. But I think probably for me, what is most important is like I deeply cared about the students I worked with. They were really hardworking, good people. They really were. And I learned so much from them. Hopefully they learned as much from me as I learned from them. It was just such an overwhelmingly positive experience for me. And so when you hear about these systems that are, I guess, operating around the student, and then you hear admissions officers say, well, they're all cheating, or it's all fraud, or whatever, it's really frustrating. And if no one else wants to stand up and talk about it, I guess I will, until someone better comes along and takes the flag for me. So yeah, I mean, I haven't been back to China since I've started all this. I don't know if I will be anytime soon. But I mean, I still have so many people there that I really love and care about. And I don't know, talking to students about it here, a lot of them are frustrated themselves about the situation they went through. I mean, I've worked with students who have told me that, oh, you know, my parents paid 50,000 RMB for them to do my entire application, and then I got angry after they did it. But the parents had given away the student ID number, and the daughter couldn't access her own portfolio to try and prepare to go abroad. So, you know, I think students are kind of upset about it too, but they're like, well, whatever, now I'm here. It's like, I'm just moving on. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And obviously I need to be careful with my words, which I talk quickly, so I'm usually not, which is gonna get me into trouble at some point. But yeah, I need to, it's a good question. So thank you for, mentioning it.
Miri?
Can I come in? I guess we could be talking about this for a very long time here, but again, thinking about comparative approaches, since we're in this forum, what would be really interesting to find out is to what extent does this kind of ethical or unethical help with applications and writing, you know, happen to in other groups of people. I'm sure you know what I'm hinting at, but you know, is this generic? I mean, what parent wouldn't do anything in their power to get their kids, or to give their kids good schooling and quality education? You know, what parent wouldn't help with an application? What, you know, so where do we draw the line between, you know, what is okay and what isn't okay? You know, it's this ethical issue in your topic area is absolutely, you know, on the edge. It's really important research, and I just want to support you in continuing with it, and look forward to just reading more about it, and let's continue the debate.
Thanks
Well
so
done.
Much. We have a couple minutes until we're supposed to wrap up. I just wanted to ask a brief question of Scott, because I think I know what an international school is, and your definition was useful. But I was wondering if you wanted to make a couple comments just to help us think about what kinds of assumptions should we make about international schools? Like, should we be thinking about these schools as schools with they're kind of providing kind of social and cultural capital to help students become kind of like part of the transnational elite, or kind of are these just I'm trying, and I know this is like an impossible question to answer because there must be so much diversity within the category of international schools, but just as we're talking about, you know, Mark's issue and some of these other programs preparing students for international lives, kind of how do these international schools fall into this landscape?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I recently wrote a paper for you that kind of detailed 3 different types of international schools that have kind of been defined. International schools were originally developed to cater to those international students, so the expat students. So kind of the students that I outlined, that was specifically what the international schools were designed for. But it evolved a little bit into some of this, we had this discussion on globalized education, and some schools developed towards a more global model versus, so focusing on the orientation of the school versus the composition of the school. And so that was a different school, but much less popular still than the first type of school, which is just catering to those international expat students. But more recently, it's become kind of privatized, or I mean, they're all privatized, but for profit. Some schools have turned into for-profit schools. We have international school chains, and there's been an increase in catering to national students. And some people have argued that national students attending an international school still can be considered third culture kids. I don't know if I'm sold on that or not. But to your point of what is produced, who are these students? What are they doing? The counselor at the International School of Munich was a graduate of my school counseling program, and I spoke with her a little bit about it. And it was difficult for her because oftentimes as someone getting into school counseling or the education profession, you want to help those that are disadvantaged. You want to promote equity. You want to do all of these things. And an international school is kind of the opposite of that because it's a tuition, very high tuition. You do have a lot of elite students there. And she had kind of a poignant explanation of why she wanted to be there, is that she couldn't dramatically change the global structure of our global capitalist structure, but having someone in a position that is working with these children of multimillionaire business people and diplomats and these things, having people in those positions that can work with those students to make sure that they are learning the right things. And this is to Mark's point of having people in those positions that if you are a student that is highly advantaged over other students and inevitably may reach peaks that other students can never reach just based on your family, your money, whatever it may be, making sure that you have people in those positions that are teaching you, that are supporting your social emotional health, that can teach you healthy ways of promoting equity. So passing that on, I think that's kind of the way that I look at the international schools. Is I can't change the global structure, but the students that the school is producing, I can hopefully help these students be better positive influences when they get in those positions that I can't be in, you know? So I hope that answered some of the questions that you were asking. And then I think I saw in the chat that Miriam, you were asking plans of like implementation. I would love to implement a transition curriculum. One of my big frustrations when I'm looking at this is that there's such a lack of consistency and comprehensiveness. Every international school basically has a buddy program and an orientation, and that's kind of it. And they're like, we have a transition program. And like I said before, these students are just by their nature often will be getting into positions of power, getting into elite schools, these types of things. So making sure that they have the tools to be healthy global citizens and teaching them the right things, I think is really important. And by doing that, I think transition programs in international schools currently are failing because they are not emphasizing the strengths that these students have. So emphasizing that multiculturalism and that leadership and your adaptability and all these things. There's not a big emphasis on it. It's kind of, well, that's what you got, so keep it. You know, it's not promoting that and furthering it and further developing it. And then also not doing a good enough job to stop the negative parts, which primarily is connections. So a lot of times TCKs are referred to as cultural chameleons. So it's just kind of like, I can meet anybody and be friends with anybody, but I'm not going to have a deep connection with them. And I think that can be very problematic if you get into business or policy development or anything like that. I would hope that these students would be able to make connections and feel connected to the world, to different countries, to the people that they've interacted with. And I think that's really important. So I would love to try to develop this curriculum and get in touch with the right people. But again, it's difficult. And it's also difficult because some schools don't see the value of it. Some schools don't understand or haven't been exposed to the need for transition programs. So it's a hard sell and a long
we'll
journey.
have Erica let me know by chat that she had a question. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll have one last question and then we'll close. And if anybody needs to leave the room, that's fine too. Erica.
Yeah, sorry, I can't turn on my camera, COVID times, but Scott, I just had a sort of probably a tangential remark, but a lot of my experience with international schools is in Japan, where there's sort of a unique feature to them that they also happen to be a place where many mixed race children, domestic students, national students, but mixed race students end up because they don't fit within the traditional context of private or public schools within the country. And so when you'd mentioned that you're not sold on this idea that domestic students who go to international schools can be third culture kids, that might actually be a subset that doesn't show up as often in a European context or a context where national populations are much more heterogeneous. But if you looked in East Asia, particularly with mixed race populations that are quite small, you might find that takes up a disproportionate amount of the student population and changes the impact of attending an international school for that student. And I think that would also impact the kind of transition program you're talking about, because their experience and what they're seeking from that school in the first place is quite different.
I absolutely agree. I think, and that's the issue with defining third culture kids, is there's a commonly accepted definition. And then you get into kind of this conversation about, well, what aspects of transition are students experiencing? I recently read a study on a Malaysian international school, and Malaysian students were incorporated in this study as third culture kids. They had grown up in Malaysia, and there was not necessarily any multiculturalism or anything kind of out of the ordinary. It was just this was a very highly prized school, and a lot of opportunity to get into international universities. And so then that those are the issues where I think it arises, and there's kind of discussion in the literature of, okay, well, if you are considering TCK transition, like, are these students experiencing it the same way? And then should they all be grouped together as third culture kids, or should there be subsets of these students so that there's more attention paid to their unique concerns? And I think that kind of talks, or kind of gets the discussion even further of, well, what about transition of national students between schools? What if you, like in the United States, what if you move states? That is still a transition, and a big transition. But what unique concerns are in that aspect differently from international mobility? And I think it's a really interesting question, because I read that, and then it was even further kind of delineated into what could be incorporated as a third culture kid. And so it's interesting that there's discussion on that.
As a third culture kid myself, it was really interesting to hear your presentation. There's a lot that resonated, and I think you've got some really interesting work. Thank you.
Thank you.
And going forward, if it's not already on your radar, there's some literature that's come out in recent years about the ways that kind of prestigious schools, private schools, are kind of purposely preparing students to join this kind of transnational elite. And so I wonder to what extent there's like an overlap there between kind of what international schools that you're looking at are doing and what some of these other types of schools that have been studied are doing. So just a suggestion. Thank you all for joining us and for sticking around at about 10 minutes past the time listed in the conference program. I did record this, and so I had to go look at the instructions that were given to me, but I will be able to share the link with everyone for anybody who might be interested. So I think this link might be on a website somewhere at some point. But yes, thank you all for joining us. Feel free to get in touch with myself or with the others. And it's been a pleasure. So hope this was a rewarding experience for everyone, and enjoy the rest of the conference. It's so nice to see new faces on my screen. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. That was a great presentation. That was really good, Brent. Really good organizing and really good sessions from everyone.
Thank you.